Hello, Dorothy Marie Rice. Welcome to the Black Lives Matter First Friday interview for our virtual art show ongoing for 2021. We're so happy to have you here. And
Hello, Jennifer. It's my pleasure to have this opportunity for us to have an interview.
well,
Thank you very much.
yeah, sure. We're delighted to have the opportunity to talk with you. So Anne Rinn, the co-founder of the Black Lives Matter art show, says that you and she both grew up in Connecticut. So do you want to tell us a little bit about your origins?
Well, that's interesting because I didn't know that until very recently.
Mhm.
She posted a painting, and I believe it was on the water over. So she's from the eastern part, and I'm from the western part. As a matter of fact, I went to Western Connecticut State University. So I'm from the town and city of Danbury, Connecticut, which was formerly the hat capital of the world, which is how my parents happened to come. They migrated from Virginia to work in the factory, and the first factories they worked in were in the hat factory, well, the fur factories. And it was really dirty work because they used animal pelts to create the felts for the hats.
Wow.
And so they inhaled a lot of fibers, I'm sure, but it was their opportunity to make money. And they did what was called piecework at the time. You were paid by the piece. And most of the people that we knew or that my parents had grown up with had also migrated to that particular town. So we were surrounded by family and friends from Virginia.
Wonderful. So why did you decide to come back to Virginia?
Well, my mother's desire was to always return home, as she called it. So the closest she could get to home, which is in Pittsylvania County, not Pennsylvania, but Pitt, which is in the southwestern part of the state. She always wanted to come back. And the closest she got was to Richmond, Virginia, because she had two sisters who already resided here. So she came to Richmond. And then about 10 or 20 years later, she bought a trailer and purchased some land very close to the land that she was raised on.
Awesome. So you were already out of school and
I
looking,
was a big girl when she
yeah,
came down here.
yeah, were you
My
looking?
parents had divorced, which saddened me. Even though I was an adult, I already had two children and I knew they had problems, but I loved them both. So when they separated and then divorced, I had to readjust as an adult. A lot of people don't think that it affects adults, but it does. But they separated and went their different ways. And my once my mother came down to Richmond, she said to me, you know, you young people should come down here. They're hiring the Philip Morris. Well, I was a teacher, so I wasn't interested in working at Philip Morris, but my husband thought it might be a good opportunity. So we moved to Richmond. I had a 4-month-old baby and a 6-year-old son, and we drove down and we got lost on the way. I'll never forget. I think we also got a flat tire. So my husband was in the moving van way ahead of me, and that was in the days before cell phones. So we had to, that was back in 1975. So we had to just pray that we would catch up with my husband at the next stop. We didn't. We didn't see him till we got on Jeff Davis Turnpike. But we came here. We lived in a little 4-room bungalow, as I called it. And it was a skip and a jump from my mother's house. So I was over there all the time. I got a little bit bored of being a full-time mother. So I said, I think I'll apply for substitute teaching. So I went down to City Hall and I talked to Leila Morris. I talked to Leila Morris, and she was quite impressed with me. So she said, we might have an opening for you at Patrick Henry Elementary School. First grade, would you be interested? And I said, well, yes. I thought I was going to have some really good luck. So I took that position. My mother continued to babysit for my children. And that's how I ended up staying here far longer than I had anticipated.
Awesome. Well, so you've spent most of your life here, your adult life here.
Yes.
And how did you get involved in Black Lives Matter?
Well, actually, Jennifer, you're the reason why. I had gone to the gallery, I think it was, I can't think of the name of the gallery now. I saw a poster, and on the poster, it had your name and another name, and it was advertising the Black Lives Matter show. And the deadline had come and gone. But I said, oh my goodness, I wonder if I can, your phone number was on the poster. So I called you and begged you, and you agreed to, if I could get there, meet you at the church, and you would look at the pieces I had. You looked at the pieces, you were a little overwhelmed because you were trying to get the show together. So you accepted my two pieces. That's how I got involved in the very first show.
Of course, at the Unitarian Church.
Yes.
You know what? You and I go way, way back because we both had children at Bellevue Elementary.
That's right. And we were on the board.
Well, that's how I knew about you.
Yes.
Already. So it was a easy leap to invite you to be part of the Black Lives Matter show. And then later became I think it was in 2017, was it? Or 2018. You became the head of the show, and you were responsible for putting on the whole show, and you did a beautiful job, a nice evening of entertainment. And
thank you. But again, I give you props because I wouldn't have been able to do it if I had not been able to call you every time I had a concern, and you walked me through a lot of that. Because initially I was thinking, I can't do this. I've never done anything on this scale. And then I had to talk back to myself and say, you're always encouraging others to go over and beyond, then you need to follow your own advice. And I did, and I'm glad I did.
Oh, well, I'm so glad you did too. So Dorothy, you're also known in Richmond as a poet extraordinaire.
Thank you.
How does your poetry and your artwork intersect?
Well, it's interesting because with my poetry, I paint with words. And with my art, I do just the opposite. So I found that it was easy for me to use descriptive words to create an image. And later on, I used my art. I just started playing around with some art. I never considered myself an artist for real, even though I was around artists a lot at the Arts and Humanities Center. Richmond Public Schools had as a matter of fact, a program, and we also had a place for students to come and get opportunities to do art and theater and poetry and dance. And I was hired as the literature and history resource teacher. Of course, whenever you're a teacher, you're also a learner. And I was around such luminaries as Dennis Winston and Leslie Messersmith, two very gifted artists. And by that exposure, I think osmosis made me become aware of how art could be expressed in so many different ways. We had lots of art on our walls there too. So I think that just that exposure to those kinds of people, and art teachers were in and out of our building. And I just felt an affinity for those people, the artists and the musicians and the dancers and the actors.
So it really spoke to your creative side.
Absolutely. It just opened up a part of me that existed when I was a little girl, because when I was very small, I used to do what everyone else does, draw in the dirt. And I used to sew, do some hand sewing and embroidery. I also learned how to crochet when I was 9 years old. And only when I was an adult that I learned how to knit. So fiber was my medium. And my mother was a knitter, but she could not teach me how to knit. I had to actually take a class and to learn how to knit, because the way my mother did it and the way that I don't know, I don't know if it was our personalities or what, but I just couldn't get it when she
That is
showed me.
knitting that really spoke to your sense of color too.
Color and touch.
Who are some of your greatest influences in your
Well, I met a lady in 1976. Her name was Jeanette Drake. We met at an event called Expressions of Black Art. And I attended that event with at that time, I called it my so-called poetry, because I wasn't willing to say that I was a poet. I didn't think that I had the credentials to call myself a poet. But I read a couple of my poems, and Jeanette was there on the premises. Do you know Jeanette?
I sure do.
And she says, Dorothy, I love your poetry. And I said, you do? And from that experience back in, I think it was 1976 or 1977, we became friends. Eventually, we became co-mentor and mentees. And so much of my poetry was encouraged by Jeanette. We used to have chats on the phone, and I would share a poem with her, and she said, Dorothy, you need to get that published. And likewise with her, she would share with her poetry with me, and I would give her critiques. And we really had a very symbiotic relationship.
Awesome. Jeanette was an amazing Richmond poet.
She was.
Let's pull up some of your artwork so that everybody can see what we're talking about. We could take a look at your first piece, which is entitled Temporary Embrace, and it is under the category of identity. So do you want to tell us a little about this piece?
This piece was based on a photograph that I took of my great-granddaughter, Aviana, and her father. Well, her parents were an interesting couple, because he lived in Atlanta, and that's where my granddaughter met him. And then she came back to Richmond, and about a year later, she was pregnant. So I had to accept him. I wasn't quite willing to accept this guy that I didn't know much about, but I knew I had to be there for the baby. So he had come to visit, because that's what they did. They would travel back and forth. He would come to Richmond, and she would go to Atlanta. And I became rather fond of him. And I guess it was because he was dedicated. And this particular event, he was holding her. And I just said, this is wonderful. And I just hope that one day this will matter to her, because the relationship between a father and a child, but specifically a father and a daughter, I think is really precious. And that's why I created that.
Beautiful piece.
Thank you.
Beautiful little girl. So let's take a look at your second piece, and that is entitled You Know How I Feel, and it's in the category of inspiration and aspiration. So tell us a little about this.
I love Nina Simone. And I was listening to her song, which is on the air all the time. There's a advertisement, a commercial, and her song is on there. But I looked at this piece, which had been really produced before I was listening to the song, and then I saw so many elements of the song in this piece.
Wow.
This is how most of my art is. I call it serendipity or random, and I will have bits and pieces of something from a presumably failed piece, but I save it. And what I have here are scraps of things that I had saved. It scares me because I don't want to be a hoarder, but I found that I'm hoarding pieces of paper. So what you see on the right side is it looks like something celestial. It could be the sun or the moon. So the top part, the top layer is a coffee filter. You know how sometimes when you put that filter down, you can see a pattern. I saw a pattern there. And then the foil was probably from some candy or something like that that had been wrapped. And the pieces at the bottom were selected from other pieces of art. And a lot of my art becomes, it seems to know what it wants to be, and I accept it. I realized that even though I had not been to art school, that I had an artistic sense of color, arrangement, and then again, of course, I had that exposure to the arts at the Arts and Humanities Center. So a lot of my pieces look like this.
So do you think this is the direction your art will be pursuing?
Well, it does. I find that that's where sometimes I just want to create something. And because, again, I haven't really studied how to draw, I am beginning to teach myself and practice some things because I know drawing is so very important. So I think that I will continue with these spontaneous pieces, but I also want to do some things that look more formally arranged.
Yeah. Well, you like some of your art are a work in progress.
Yes.
like like all of us on the creative path, we're always developing and going forward. Well, I want to thank you so much for allowing us to have you on the air here. So Dorothy, thank you so much for allowing us to interview you. It was wonderful. And is there anything else you'd like to add?
You're welcome. I would like to say that the art behind me is another one of my surprise or serendipity pieces where I was just playing with paint. And then after I looked, I said, oh, this looks like, then I added a few strokes here and there. And doesn't it look like a landscape of some sort? You see, this seems like the sun beams are streaming down, could be in the Grand Canyon or something like that. I just accept whatever God gives me.
Well, that's wonderful. Thank you again so much.
You're welcome.